The wind was a blade against Alara's cheek, honed on the high peaks and wielded with relentless spite. It tore at the thin wool of her shawl, a meager defense against the crushing cold of a world that had already taken everything else. Below, in the glen, the peat smoke plumes of her former life rose like faint, mocking ghosts. Here, on the barren shoulder of the mountain, there was only the shriek of the gale and the granite teeth of the crags. Despair was a physical weight, settling deep in her bones, heavier than the sleeping form of her son, Liam, bundled against her back. His breath was a shallow, rattling thing, a sound that frayed the last threads of her composure. They were outcasts. Her husband's death in a rockslide had been a tragedy. The clan's judgment that followed was a cruelty. Widowed with a sickly child, she was deemed a drain, a bad omen. Cormac, the clan elder, with his wet, greedy eyes and the faint scent of soured mead always on his breath, had offered his protection a marriage, he'd called it. Cage she knew it to be. The price of a roof and a bowl of stew was her dignity, her body, her son's future under the thumb of a lecher. The alternative was this: the unforgiving wilderness, a slow, freezing death. Her gaze lifted to the forbidding slopes above, to the place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones around the communal fire. The mountain's heart, his domain. They called him the scarred man, the beast of the ridge. Kale, a warrior broken in some forgotten clan war, cast out not for weakness but for a ferocity that frightened even the hard men of the glen. He lived alone, a ghost in the high stone, and the stories painted him as more monster than man. Yet, in that monstrosity Alara saw a sliver of hope. A monster did not posture. A monster did not smile with false comfort while its eyes stripped you bare. A monster was honest in its nature. And so she had chosen, not the leering, soft-handed evil below, but the unknown, violent solitude above. Each step was a battle, her worn leather boots slipping on ice-slicked stone. The air thinned, burning her lungs. Liam's weight felt impossible. She was a wraith moving through a skeletal forest of birch, their white limbs stark against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Finally, she saw it. Not a cave, but a cabin, built low and solid against a rock face, looking as if it had grown from the mountain itself. A curl of smoke, thick and steady, rose from a stone chimney. Life. She stumbled into the small clearing, her legs giving way. She fell to her knees in the snow, the impact jarring Liam, who stirred with a weak cry. The cabin door opened. He emerged not with a roar, but in silence. He was taller than the stories said, broader. A wild, dark beard covered the lower half of his face, but it could not hide the ruin of the left side. A web of thick, silvered scars pulled the corner of his eye and mouth into a permanent, unnerving grimace. His gaze was not cruel, but intensely still, a predator's watchfulness. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of Alara's exhaustion. This was him, the beast. She forced herself to her feet, her body trembling. Her voice, when it came, was a raw whisper, nearly stolen by the wind. I am Alara. She did not offer a clan name. It was no longer hers to give. This is my son, Liam. The man Kale said nothing. His eyes, a startlingly clear gray, flickered from her face to the bundle on her back. The clan, she began, her throat closing. They would see me wed to Cormac, or they would see me starve. She took a breath, the icy air a shock to her system. This was the precipice. I will not have him. I choose this. I choose you. The words hung in the frozen air, audacious and desperate. I offer myself in marriage. I will keep your home. I will be your wife. In return, you will give us sanctuary. You will protect my son. He took a step forward. Alara flinched, her hand flying instinctively to the bundle on her back. He stopped. His scarred face was impossible to read, a mask of old pain. He looked at her, truly looked, and for a moment, she felt he saw not just her chapped lips and fear-widened eyes, but the entire wretched story that had driven her up his mountain. He gave a single, slow nod. It was not agreement so much as acknowledgement. Then he moved past her, his steps sure-footed and silent. He gestured toward the open door of the cabin. It was an invitation, an acceptance. As she hesitated, he turned back, and his gaze fell on Liam. He reached out, his hands large and calloused, scarred like his face. Alara's heart seized, but she stood her ground. He did not touch her. Instead, he gently, carefully, unlaced the bindings and lifted her son from her back. Liam, so frail in her arms, looked impossibly small against the man's vast chest. Cale held the boy with a strange, unnerving reverence, shielding him from the wind with his own body as he carried him inside, toward the fire. Alara followed, stepping over the threshold from one life into another. The warmth that met her was a physical blow. A great fire roared in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the timber walls. The single room was sparse but clean, radiating a sense of order and severe purpose. Furs were piled neatly in a corner, dried herbs hung from the rafters, and the air smelled of pine, wood smoke, and something else, the faint metallic scent of sharpened steel. Cale laid Liam on a bed of soft deer hides near the fire, pulling a thick bear pelt over him. The boy coughed, a dry, ragged sound, and settled into a feverish sleep. Alara sank onto a low stool, the strength finally leaving her limbs. She watched the scarred man move about the small space. He did so with a quiet economy of motion, ladling broth from a pot over the fire into a wooden bowl. He placed it, along with a piece of hard bread, on the small table beside her. He did not speak. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the howling of the wind outside, a beast shut out from their small sanctuary. She ate, the hot broth chasing away some of the deep, gnawing chill. Her fear began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of uncertainty. She had made her bargain. She had offered herself to the monster on the mountain, and he had taken her in. Now she had to learn to live with him. She looked at his face, illuminated by the firelight. The scars were a map of violence, each line telling a story she could not read. But in his eyes, as he watched her son sleep, she saw not monstrosity, but a deep, abiding loneliness that echoed her own. Days bled into weeks, measured by the rising and setting of a pale winter sun. The mountain became their world, the cabin its heart. A rhythm established itself, unspoken and instinctive. Cale would rise before dawn, the sound of him stoking the fire the first thing Alara heard. He would leave with an axe or his bow and return hours later, silent as his departure, with firewood stacked to his chin or a pair of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He never demanded anything of her. He simply provided. And Alara, in turn, began to transform the shelter into a home. She learned the particularities of the hearth, how to bank the coals so they would last through the night. She mended the tears in his coarse-spun tunic, her needle moving with a forgotten steadiness. She found his small store of dried herbs and began making infusions for Liam, whose cough slowly eased in the dry warmth of the cabin, his cheeks regaining a fragile pinkness. Their communication was a language of gestures and actions. A log placed on the fire was gratitude. A bowl of hot stew left on the hearth was care. A sharpened knife laid by the skinning post was a statement of provision. Alara found herself watching him, not with fear, but with a cautious curiosity. She saw the way his large, rough hands could be exquisitely gentle as he carved a piece of scrap wood for Liam, his knife peeling away delicate curls to reveal the shape of a wolf, its head tilted as if listening. He gave it to the boy without a word, and Liam, who had barely spoken since his father's death, clutched it as if it were a treasure. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, sealing them in their cocoon of warmth and firelight, Alara found the courage to speak. "He misses his father," she said softly, her voice startling in the quiet. Cale was sharpening a broad-headed arrow, the scrape of stone on steel a steady, rhythmic sound. He did not stop, but his hands stilled for a fraction of a second. "He was a good man," Alara continued, speaking to the flames. "Kind. He taught Liam the names of the stars." Cale set the arrow down. He looked at her, his scarred face impassive in the flickering light. His gaze held hers, and in it, she saw a profound and terrible understanding of loss. He did not offer empty words of comfort. He simply resumed his work, the scraping sound filling the space her words had emptied. But something had shifted. A door, closed for years, had been nudged open. She began to see the man beneath the scars, the warrior beneath the silence. She saw the discipline in the way he maintained his weapons, the knowledge in the way he read the snow for tracks, the resilience in the very fact of his survival. He was a part of the mountain, as hard, as unforgiving, but also as steadfast and protective. She was no longer just a refugee he had taken in. She was the keeper of his hearth. Her son was the recipient of his quietest affections. The word husband, once a term of dread and desperation, began to form in her mind, not as a title of ownership, but as a description of the man who banked the fire against the cold and stood as a bulwark between her family and the merciless world. One afternoon, while Cale was hunting, Liam, looking stronger than he had in months, pointed a small finger toward the wall where Cale's old war shield hung. It was battered, a round piece of wood and boiled leather, its face bearing a faded emblem of a swooping hawk. "Papa's," he whispered. Alara's heart ached. "No, little one. That belongs to Cale." Liam looked from the shield to the small wooden wolf in his hand, then back to the shield. To him, the man who brought him wood to play with and the man who owned the shield were one and the same. Protector. That evening, as Alara served the meal of roasted grouse, she noticed a fresh wound on Cale's forearm, a long, deep gash, hastily bound with a strip of cloth. A wolf, perhaps, or a slip on the ice. He ate without complaint, favoring the arm. After they had eaten, she took the bowl of warm water she had set by the fire and a clean rag. She knelt before him. He stiffened, his body going rigid as she reached for his arm. "Let me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. It was not a request. He watched her, his gray eyes narrowed, suspicious. Slowly he extended his arm. She unwrapped the crude binding. The cut was clean but deep. As she washed away the dried blood, her fingers traced the edge of an older, puckered scar nearby. His arm was a tapestry of old violence. She worked in silence, her touch gentle, methodical. She cleaned the wound, applied a salve of crushed yarrow from her small supply, and bound it tightly with fresh linen. When she was finished, her hands lingered on his arm for a moment. He did not pull away. His skin was warm beneath her touch. He was solid, real. He was the man who had faced down wolves and blizzards, and he had allowed her this small act of care. In that moment, the last of her fear dissolved, washed away by a strange and powerful current of connection. He was her husband. This was her home, and she would defend it, and him, with all the strength she had discovered within herself on this lonely mountain. The thaw came late, a slow, grudging retreat of the snow. Meltwater trickled down the rocks, and the first green shoots of mountain sorrel pushed through the damp earth. The change in season brought a change to the glen. With the passes clearing, Cormac's wounded pride began to fester anew. Whispers reached him, carried by a lone hunter who had strayed too high. Whispers of the widow Alara, not dead or broken, but living, and the boy Liam looking healthy. The story twisted in the telling, colored by fear and envy. The beast of the ridge had not devoured her, but claimed her. And the old rumors of the Silver Cale supposedly took from the southern clans during the wars resurfaced, now mingled with the insult of Alara's choice. Greed and vengeance were potent motivators. Cormac gathered 4 men, bullies and malcontents loyal to his coin and his cask of ale. He fed them stories of rescue and riches. They would go up the mountain, he declared, to save the woman from her captor and reclaim the clan's honor. They chose their moment carefully, ascending under the cover of a late spring storm, the sky a churning cauldron of black clouds and spitting rain that promised to turn to sleet at the higher elevations. Inside the cabin, the world had shrunk to the warm glow of the fire. Alara was teaching Liam how to weave a simple rush cord, their heads bent together. Cale was near the door, oiling the leather straps of his shield, his movements methodical. He suddenly went still, his head lifting. He was not looking at anything, but listening to a sound Alara could not hear, something beyond the drumming of the rain on the roof. He rose silently and moved to the heavy wooden bar that secured the door, his hand resting on it. "What is it?" Alara whispered, her own heart beginning to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He did not answer. He merely shook his head, a silent command for her to stay quiet. He picked up his short sword from the pegs on the wall, the worn leather of the hilt seeming to meld with his hand. He was no longer the quiet man who carved toys. He was the warrior from the stories, every line of his body radiating a lethal stillness. Then she heard it, a crunch of gravel outside, a low, muttered curse carried on a gust of wind. They were not alone. Alara. Cale's voice was a low rumble, the first time he had spoken her name in weeks. "Take the boy." The back, he gestured with his chin to a small, hide-covered opening in the rear of the cabin. One she knew led to a narrow crevice in the rock face, a desperate escape route. A crash against the door made them all jump. "Cale, you beast! Send out the woman." Cormac's voice, slurred with false courage and mead. "She is clan property. We've come for what is ours." Alara looked at Liam's terrified face, then at Cale's back, broad and solid as the mountain itself. A year ago she would have fled. She would have snatched her son and scrambled into the darkness. But she was not the same woman who had staggered up this mountain. This was her hearth. This was her husband. A fierce, unfamiliar rage burned away her fear. She pulled Liam behind her, pressing him into the corner behind the woodpile. "Stay here. Do not make a sound," she commanded, her voice steady. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, its weight solid and reassuring in her hands. The door shuddered again, the wood groaning. Cale didn't wait for them to break it down. With a sudden, swift movement, he lifted the bar. He kicked the door open himself, stepping out into the maelstrom. The men outside, poised to charge, stumbled back in surprise. Alara saw them through the doorway. 4 of them clustered around Cormac, their faces pale and uncertain in the stormlight. Cale did not roar. He did not charge. He used the mountain. With 2 quick strides, he was upslope, a gray shadow against the gray rock. The first man who rushed him slipped on the wet stone, and Cale's sword hilt caught him hard under the jaw, sending him sprawling. The second came with a rusty axe, swinging wildly. Cale deflected the blow with his shield, the clang of metal echoing dully in the rain. He moved with a brutal efficiency, using their momentum against them, disarming one, disabling another with a precise, calculated blow to the knee. It was not a brawl. It was a dismantling. Cormac, seeing his men falling, shrieked in fury and pulled a long knife, lunging for the open cabin door, for Alara. But she was ready. As he burst through the threshold, she swung the iron poker with all her strength. It connected with his knife hand with a sickening crack. The knife clattered to the floor. Cormac howled, clutching his wrist, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Outside, the fight was over. Cale stood over the last groaning man, his sword at the man's throat. He looked back at the cabin, saw Cormac on his knees, and Alara standing over him, poker held like a scepter. He sent the last man scrambling down the mountain after his broken comrades. Then he entered the cabin, rain streaming from his hair and beard. He looked at Cormac, then at Alara, then at the poker in her hand. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gray eyes. He simply took Cormac by the collar and dragged him back out into the storm, a disgraced and broken man. The storm passed with the night. Dawn broke over a world washed clean, the sky a fragile, pristine blue. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of wet earth and pine. Inside the cabin, a tentative peace had settled. Alara was seated on the stool by the fire, stitching a gash in Cale's tunic sleeve where an errant blade had caught him. Liam was asleep, the small wooden wolf clutched to his chest. Cale sat across from her, watching her fingers work the needle. The silence between them was different now. It was not a void, but a shared space, filled with the unspoken events of the night. He had fought for her. She had defended his home. They were a clan of 2. their alliance sealed not by vows before an elder, but by iron and fire. "The cut on your arm," she said, her voice low. "From before. It was not a wolf, was it?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze on the fire. "A scout," he finally said, his voice rough, as if pulling the word from a deep and used well. "Cormac's man. I sent him back with a warning. He had known they were coming. He had been watching, waiting, protecting them all along." She finished her stitch and tied off the thread, her work neat and strong. She looked up at him, at the ruined side of his face. Her hand rose, and this time she did not hesitate. She laid her palm gently against his scarred cheek. He did not flinch. He did not move at all, but she felt the slightest tremor run through him, a current of deep, suppressed emotion. His skin was rough, but warm. It was just a part of him, like the strength in his arms or the quiet in his soul. He had been cast out for his scars, and she for her misfortune. The world below saw only their damage. Here, on the mountain, they had found a place where they were whole. "He named you Beast," she murmured, her thumb stroking the edge of a silvered line. "But a beast would have killed them." Kale's good eye closed for a moment. When he opened it, the guarded stillness was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability she had never seen. "And a monster," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "would not have known what to do with a woman who fights back." Alara let her hand fall away, a small smile touching her lips. She had not merely married the scarred mountain man. She had climbed a mountain of despair and discovered not a monster, but a man. In choosing to stand with him, she had done more than save herself and her son. She had altered the destiny of the outcasts, forging a new clan from broken pieces, its foundations built on the unyielding stone of the mountain and the resilient strength of two lonely hearts. The glen below could keep its judgment and its petty cruelties. Here, in the clean, high air, a new story was beginning.